Senator Ted Cruz is with us now. And Ted, welcome to the program. I liked what you announced last night.
Glenn, good to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. The No Vaccines Passport Act. I think this is one of the more important things. Can you explain why it's important?
Well, sure. So this week I've introduced legislation in the Senate to prohibit vaccine passports. My view on vaccines, I believe in vaccines. I've gotten the COVID vaccine myself. Heidi's gotten it. My parents have gotten it. I'm grateful that we have the innovation that led to the vaccines that has enabled for so many of us to return to normal life and the freedoms that we cherish. That being said, I think the decision whether or not to get the vaccine is a personal decision. It ought to be up to you. You ought to make it for your life, for your health situation. And the federal government shouldn't mandate it. There shouldn't be a federally mandated passport. And we should protect your civil rights, your individual liberty. So what my legislation does, it prevents the federal government from requiring a vaccine passport. And it also prohibits discrimination based on whether or not you choose to get the vaccine. We're seeing employers across the country who are firing their employees if they don't get vaccinated. I think that's not right. You ought to have the same civil rights protections you have for other things in the workplace. And it ought to be your individual choice based on your individual liberty.
I have to tell you, Ted, this has become all about politics, 100% about politics. People have lost their reason entirely. I haven't gotten a vaccine because I had it in December, and I had a bad bout with it. The research all shows, if you want to follow the science, if you've had it, you have the antibodies. And all of this crap that they were saying for the last year about, but it may not last very long. They say that if you've had a good case of COVID, that you have the antibodies, and they could last up to years. And I go places and I'm not wearing a mask, and I'll say, I had it. Oh my gosh, it's like all of a sudden you're Goebbels or something.
There's so much politics about this that it's bizarre. I mean, my view, I've never understood the extremes on either ends of this. That there are some folks who never wear a mask and say wearing a mask is terrible. I don't get that. Look, it was a contagious disease. It's dangerous. In vulnerable populations, it could be deadly. I wore a mask. I still wear a mask on an airplane, and I think taking reasonable steps to limit the spread of an infectious disease, I think that makes sense. But on the other side, the folks that are just virtue signaling that a mask shows how righteous they are, I think is bizarre. When you're driving down the road and you see someone in a car alone wearing a mask or a double mask, I just laugh out loud. It's like,
I know.
What the heck is wrong with you?
I know. It's really bizarre. So the vaccine...
I will say, Glenn, I got in trouble with my team because I did tweet out, I said, wearing a mask in a car alone is like wearing a condom in bed alone.
Very true. Very true.
Well, what exactly is the point
here? So Ted, the problem with the vaccines, but the problem with the vaccine passport, the government is going to say, we're not going to do any vaccine passports. If the private industry wants to do that, but they are making an end run around our Constitution on almost everything, with the coddling of these giant corporations. I've never been a guy who's been against corporations. I'm a free market guy. But when the free market becomes an arm of the government, and they are the ones spying on people because the government can't, but we'll share that information with the government, that's just an end run. Is there anything that's going to stop these corporations from doing this?
Well, part of the legislation I've introduced prohibits discrimination based on vaccine status. And so what it does is it adds it to the existing civil rights laws. And so the Americans with Disabilities Act, for example, requires that you make a reasonable accommodation for an employee that has a disability. Now, reasonable accommodation doesn't mean that you always allow, look, someone who's blind, you wouldn't hire to be an airplane pilot. I mean, there are some instances where there are disqualifying medical conditions.
I would beg to differ with you, and I am not making this up. This is absolutely true. When I worked at CNN, they had a deaf sound engineer. So please don't give me your non-woke descriptions of what people can and cannot do. That's crazy, but that's what they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was the guy any good? Could he do his job?
Well, I only know that he was deaf because I had to ask about some issues, and they were like, "Yeah, don't ask. He's deaf." And I'm like, "Excuse me." Anyway. But
the point is, we have an existing legal structure that protects your civil rights, and with respect to disabilities, requires reasonable accommodations. And what my legislation does is it puts your choice of whether or not to get a vaccine with the same protection, so that the blaze doesn't fire you, Glenn, because you chose not to get a vaccine. Now, given that you control the company, I think you're pretty safe there. But
right. Well, I mean, I could be schizophrenic at some point. Let me. Is there any chance of this passing in the House and the Senate?
I don't know. So I just introduced it. The question obviously is going to be, will Democrats be willing to support it? The Biden administration has at least said publicly that they do not support a federally mandated vaccine passport. Now, I think you and I have reason to be skeptical of that claim. And so it will be interesting to see. So I have not yet, and I will in the coming weeks, be reaching out to Democrats and seeing if any Democrats are willing to come together and support it. If no Democrat supports it, then no, it won't pass in a Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi Congress. If Democrats are willing to support it, and they should, then it has a chance of passage. We'll have to see what they're willing to do.